we're continuing. So I wanted to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Honeybees and Beekeeping. And you'll learn about the fascinating lives of bees, the amazing art of beekeeping, and how it is made and why we need bees. Now I would like to introduce Frank Moriarty. He is the president of Lake County Beekeepers Association in Illinois. It's the state's largest club supporting beekeeping. He manages a few apiaries in Lake County, Illinois, and has won several regional and national awards for honey and cream honeys, even grand champion at the Heartland Apicultural Honey Competition. Frank is a professional presenter hosting over 40 beekeeping sessions at libraries, homeschool, high school AT classes, VBS, and 100 participant Cub Scout programs throughout Cook, McHenry, and Lake counties. Frank and his wife Cindy run a very successful company, honeywithstyle.com, featuring specialty honeys at numerous farmers markets and craft shows, which he's at right now, with a robust internet presence. This is his 7th year of beekeeping. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank, and I want to share my screen here and pull up Frank's slides. Share. So there we go. And I am going to turn my camera off so you can just concentrate on Frank and mute myself. And it's all yours, Frank.
Okay, great. So if you don't mind, would you be able to just throw my camera on for just 1 minute? I'll walk through a couple things here and then we'll walk through the slides. Would that be all right?
You're all set to go.
We good? Okay, great.
You're good.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm just going to walk through a couple things. I know we'll cover some of it in the slides too. Like she mentioned, I'm at one of the farmers markets out here in beautiful Highland Park, and everyone is shutting down. So you might hear a car occasionally. You might hear some slamming. Everyone's closing down, and they're going to be heading to, most of them head to a secondary market this morning. So most of these people have been up since about 3 o'clock in the morning, just bringing vegetables and all that kind of good stuff. And that's kind of where some beekeepers are also, is that's kind of where they sell some of their products. Obviously, my wife and I sell some here, but we're going to talk about honeybees today. So what I brought here is just some of the pieces that we utilize. So this piece here, this one right here is what's known as a nuke. It's a small hive. It's a very small hive. You use it for certain things, but I kind of want to give you an indication of typical hives. And there's a landing board that the bees come in. Inside of this, there'll be a handful of these frames, okay? So this is a frame. The bees have drawn out the wax on this particular one. Sometimes there's nothing on here, so just a foundation so that the bees can put wax on it. It just depends on what you're trying to do. These foundations and this drawn out comb is used for a number of different purposes by the bees. Some of it for brood, so that would be babies. And then others is for what I call people honey, which is kind of in a different spot within the hive. But we'll cover that in just a little bit. But I just thought I'd show you some of the pieces of it. Other pieces are some equipment. I'll just turn the camera here just a little bit. You can see I use a bee jacket, and you know, there's different styles of veils. That particular one's called a fencing veil. You know, I don't wear a full jacket suit anymore, but I don't work hundreds of hives. If I did, I would be fully suited up. The bees are extremely gentle. However, you got to take into account you're taking the roof off their house of every hive you're opening. So sooner or later, some of them are going to get a little testy. So anyways, that's a general bee suit that most of us wear. Some of the equipment we use is a smoker. Now, personally, I don't use a smoker very often. I move in and out of my hives pretty quickly. But generally, the purpose of a smoker is to cause the bees to go back into the box, back into the hive. If you're in there and you're in there pretty deep, you might have to go down 2 or 3 boxes. The bees start clamoring out and running around, and you want to get them back in so you don't squish very many of them. So a lot of people use a smoker for that. People also use gloves. Okay, these are, you know, heavy duty leather gloves. Initially, for the first couple of years, we use these gloves. After that, we go with much thinner nitrile gloves, mostly because, as you can see, this is propolis on here. Propolis is extremely sticky. The bees bring it in from evergreen trees. And so when it gets on your hands, it's really hard to get off. So we use rubberish gloves. They're a lighter touch. You can move around the hive a little easier, but certainly if you're going to do beekeeping first time, you'll definitely want to wear a heavier glove. Also, some of the ways we get honeybees. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. So hopefully our bees survive the winter. Okay, that is becoming a little more and more difficult over time now. The queens are having issues. Temperature swings are really wreaking havoc on some of these bees. But if the bees don't survive over the winter, we will get a box like this of bees. And generally there'll be somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 bees in here. And they will also give us a queen. And this silver thing in here is feed. So the bees will be, generally they come from either California or Georgia, and they get shipped to us in trucks or trains. You can have these sent in the mail. They don't like that because there's always hitchhiker bees on the outside, but you'll get your bees this way. And for us to put them in the hive, the way we do that is we take this off if I can get it. There we go. So we take the feed off of here and put something on there, a piece of paper, heavy cardboard, so the bees don't go flying out of here. And this is feed that we'll use again. Then the other thing we take out of here is the queen cage. So this is shipped with a plug in the end, and a queen and 1 or 2 attendant bees are inside of this little cage. The attendant bees take care of the queen. They hopefully can feed her and everything else. So that's their job. The plug that generally comes in here is one that is a cork plug, which we need to take out. And then we need to put a piece of hard candy, or a lot of people simply put a marshmallow in the end of this. And then when we put it in the hive, the bees will eat through the marshmallow to release the queen. So all of this will go into the hive. What we'll do with this is we'll put this on here like that. This will just be attached to the top of here, either a thumbtack or whatever. And we keep the bottom open so that they can get ventilation, but also that the bees in here can go in here and eat through this cork. The marshmallow, and the bees from this side are eating through the marshmallow. It takes about 3 days. After 3 days, everybody in the hive is familiar with each other so that they won't fight the queen. One of the things you always have to do is you have to be cautious that you have to make sure you don't introduce the queen to the hive too fast, because these queens probably came from from Hawaii. These bees came from either Georgia or California, so they don't know each other. After 3 days they will, but so what we'll do then is we will put that frame in here with the queen, and then we take the cover off of here and we literally dump all the bees inside the hive here, and then put more of these frames inside so that the bees will eventually build all that out, and that's their new house. Move them from this house to this house. Okay, so let's go to the slides now. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, Frank, we're on the slides.
Excellent, thanks. So, so we're going to just simply talk about beekeeping and kind of what the bees do all year long. And so let's go to the next picture there. One of the things I want everyone to realize is everybody lumps stripy things together. Anything that looks black and yellow must be a honeybee, and that is not true at all. Yellow jackets and hornets and things like that are substantially more aggressive than honeybees would ever be. So I did a homeschool session with all these kids, and I brought that's as an observation hive, and has, oh, I don't know, probably 200 bees in it. Occasionally put the queen in there so the kids can see what's going on in a hive and the activity that the bees do. So you can see these kids were never told to be afraid of honeybees. It's obvious. So of course we had a visitor honeybee come by that was in the neighborhood. We put this down, the bee must have smelled the queen, and the little bee came from some flowers nearby and came to investigate. All of the kids wanted to pet the little honeybee. Again, not a good idea, but again, it was really nice to realize that they were not afraid of them. So we kind of explained to them that, you know, you need to be really cautious around them because they do have stingers, but again, they don't want to hurt you. The reason the bees are flying around in the first place is because they're foraging, they're looking for food. That's all they're doing outside the hive. They have no other reason to be outside the hive other than to look for food or cool down the hive. So their motivation is not really to stab anybody. Their motivation is really just to go get food, which is generally in the source of nectar or pollen. All right, so let's go to the next one. In fact, let's skip one more. Go ahead. I can just talk you through. So we're just a big end. What do the bees do all day? And, you know, we'll talk about pollinators, types of honey. But as you can see, this is a beautiful yard of wildflowers. So if you want to help pollinators of any kind, and the answer should always be yes, we want to do that, plant wildflowers and plant trees. Wildflowers are beautiful to look at. Some trees will blossom very big, and it's obvious they have flowers on them. But most trees blossom, and many of them you can't even see. But the bees will go to a source. So wherever the most amount of nectar is, that's the source they go to. So plant trees and plant flowers, and the bees will find them. The pollinators will find them. The butterflies will find them. I know there's some excellent sources out there of information on if you want to be butterfly friendly, or if you want to be to draw in, you know, specialize, you want some special like monarch butterflies or certain plants that they like better than others. There's Monarch Way Station program, which is excellent. If you could get and join that, just plant some plants that the monarchs like. So I saw a note there that said, what trees do they like most? Any trees is perfect. You might have a preponderance for trees that you like better. The bees are kind of agnostic. They simply go to where the best nectar source is for that day or for that morning or for that afternoon. So no matter what tree you get to, they will get to it because the trees only bloom at a certain time, and the bees know that and the trees know that, and so they work in harmony to make sure that, you know, that all the species get pollinated. If you're going to do things like, if you want to do something like a Bartlett pear, which is really pretty, make sure you have 2 of them. Okay, you need 2 of them. Otherwise, the first one will never put out any pears because you need 2 to pollinate, 1 to pollinate the other tree. Conifers, the bees use fir trees and things like that. They use those for a thing called propolis, which is a sticky rosin that they pull in from those trees, and they use that. It's very antiseptic. They use that to line the hive with, if there's any cracks or openings, anything like that. They use that propolis and they push it onto those holes to keep that hive completely dark. It is pitch black in that hive. And they use the propolis to lock in all that stuff. The propolis itself has a very good antibacterial properties to it also. So a lot of people will ask for propolis. It's usually in some kind of alcohol-based type of thing. They're finding lots of uses for propolis these days. So let's go on to the next slide. So if you like any of these fruits or vegetables, we need honeybees. There are a lot of pollinators out there, without a doubt. In fact, yellow jackets are excellent pollinators. They're mean, but they're very good pollinators. But bees, we can manage. That's kind of the biggest difference between the other pollinators, which are swallowtail butterflies, which are the 20,000 other honeybees, bees that we have in the United States. Some of them are very specific to very certain plants. But honeybees, we can do things en masse. So for instance, if you like almonds, for instance, the bees are trucked to the almond field every year out in California, and they will just pollinate those almonds, just acres and acres and acres of almonds in a very tight window. And then after that, that's kind of when we get our honeybees for the Midwest and the rest of the country, because once they're done with the almond fields, there's really nothing to pollinate for a little while. So that's when those bees from the almond fields get shook into those packages I showed you earlier. And that's when beekeepers like myself and yourself, that's when we will get our package of about 3 pounds worth of bees. But one of the things that's interesting out there is the sheer volume of fruits that we have in the United States right now. One thing that most people don't realize is probably 80, maybe 90% of those fruits that we eat are not indigenous to the United States, are not. We have very few fruits that are indigenous to the US. I think some cherries are. There's a real tiny bitter apple, nothing like the apples we eat. Everything else was brought here either from China or from Europe. So when the settlers came here, they also brought what at the time they shipped them in skeps, which was kind of a woven hive, and they brought them over on all the ships when they came to the United States for their fruit plants because there were none here. So in fact, the honeybees used to be called the white man flies when they first got introduced into the United States. So let's go to the next picture. So this is a picture of one of our smaller apiaries. And basically I wanted to show you this because if you look, I'm looking at a frame right now, and that frame, some people look for the queen. I don't ever look for the queen. I look for sign of the queen. So I look for eggs or I look for larvae. And if I see eggs or larvae on that frame, I know the queen has been there. With eggs, she's been there within 3 days. Larvae, it's a little bit longer. But one of the things I wanted to point out, do you see bees like causing havoc and flying all over the place and being annoying? Actually, no. They're going about their business, and the ones that we're looking at live in the hive. Those are nurse bees generally, and occasionally foragers, but generally those are nurse bees, and their job is to take care of all the babies and the queens and to move nectar around the hive. So again, not crazy land. They're very gentle. There's varying styles of hives there too. The one we're looking at is called a Langstroth hive. It's a relatively old design that allowed for what's called movable frames. So that frame I'm holding, I can take out and I can examine it. They were invented quite a long time ago by Reverend Langstroth, so that people could look and see if number one, things were okay in the hive, the queen's doing what she needs to do, the bees are healthy, and also because of some diseases were getting spread in those old skeps, and you had to tear it apart to look at it. Once it was torn apart, you look at it and go, oh, everything's okay. Well, it's not anymore. It's all torn apart. So this was at the time, it was a new method of looking at the hives, and it's still being used today. So let's go to the next one. So this is one of our helpers, and she has a handful of bees. And again, nobody is really trying to bother her. They're just doing their job. In this case, we happen to have some honey, or sorry, some nectar on that comb that I gave her. And so they recognize that it's kind of outside of the hive. So they're basically retrieving that nectar, and they're going to bring it back and put it back in the hive and in one of the cells. Again, their girls are very gentle. There are varying different kinds of honeybees. There's Italians, Carnioleans, Russians. They have slightly different lineages, and some have maybe slightly different characteristics to them. The ones down south, which were really the very aggressive Africanized bees, those are very aggressive. Luckily, they're not necessarily a lot in the United States. Some lower Texas, they have some. They're very aggressive. But one of the things that they're very good at is also making honey. So those bees are being studied to see how do you combine that with the more docile, Italians or Carnioleans with the Africanized bees. So how do I kind of breed out that aggressiveness, but keep the way that they go about getting nectar and turning that into honey? All right, let's go to the next one. So a question I always ask everybody is, how many girls are in the hive? And I get answers back from 1 to 20. So out of 100 bees in the hive, how many girls? And, it's actually close to 99% are girls. 99% of the bugs in that hive are girls. There's generally one queen. Occasionally, there'll be a daughter queen, occasionally, but not very often. And then that other 1%, sometimes it might be as high as 10%, would be drones. And I liken the drones in the hive to Matthew McConaughey. So what does Matthew McConaughey do all day? I understand he drives Lincoln, some kind of Lincoln Continental. He visits his buddies. He plays pool. Once in a while, he might mate. Well, that's pretty much a drone. Their job is to pretty much just kind of hang out and hopefully mate with a queen, a virgin queen from one of the other hives. The drones will congregate in their drone yards, and the drones from, let's say 40 different hives in the area will all go to one place, and they're still trying to figure out how the drones know where to go. But they congregate in this one spot, and then a virgin queen that happens to have come from a new hive, she will fly to where the drone yard is. Again, we're not sure how she knows where it is. And hopefully she gets well mated. And well mated means with 20 drones, that's a well mated queen. And the reason you want a well mated queen is that her job is literally, once she gets back to that hive, is only to lay eggs. That's her only job, and to keep that hive alive. That's what her job is. So you want her well mated. So back to the drone portion, again, they just hang out most of the day. If they do mate with a queen, though, unfortunately, she keeps important parts of them, and the drones die. So it's not all roses for the drones. Now, the worker bees are the ones that are, again, make up that maybe 99% of the hive. They do everything else within the hive. They do all of the activities within the hive. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. So let's go to the next slide. So this is just a nice picture of all those bees doing all those things within a hive. In this case, it looks like they're bringing in nectar and they're placing it in the hive. Now, I do have some on the bottom. It looks like there's some open cells there that possibly the queen might lay in. The queen will generally lay in certain areas, which we call the brood areas. And that is a lower section of the hive. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a little bit. And then, like I mentioned, what I call people honey is always in the upper sections of hives. So you've probably driven past hives in a field somewhere. You might see 3, 4, 5 of them in a field. Those basically will have, in some cases, there's 2 bottom boxes that look really deep. Okay, well, we call them deeps. They're about 12 inches tall. And then, so those are the brood boxes for the Midwest. Anything above those is what looks like a smaller one. We call it a medium. And those are about 8.5 inches high. Those typically are where the bees will place nectar for what I call people honey. So that's extra honey. So with those 2 brood boxes that the bees have, there's plenty enough stores in there. There's plenty enough food in there. There's plenty of everything in that segment for the honeybees to survive. Everything they need is in those 2 boxes. Anything above that, once they cap it, it becomes honey, and then that's where what I call people honey. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk kind of about what the bees do all in their life. So honeybees live about 42 to 46 days in the spring, summer, early fall. That's as long as they live, from born to death. And so they don't really have a very long lifespan. In the wintertime, as you move into the wintertime, it's the queen still lays honeybees, but those winter bees, they have a little bit of a different body composition. So they're able to live within that hive for lots longer, sometimes up to 5 months. So it's a very different kind of bee. Honeybees have things, what we call fat bodies. They're very different than people. Okay, bees have kind of a mishmash of internal organs. They're not built like people. They don't breathe like we do. They breathe through their skin. So it's a different thing, but that fat bodies is just different for the winter bees than the summer bees. But if you can see on that chart, you can see that the bees themselves do many different things. So once they're born, the very first thing that they do is they go and they clean the cell that they came out of so that the queen can lay again inside of it. That's their job is to do that kind of cleaning up so that the bees can, the queen can lay lots more honeybees. The next thing that they do is they become nurse bees. So the nurse bees, if you're a glorified nurse bee, you get to take care of the queen. So your only job then is all the needs of the queen. Make sure she's fed, make sure she's clean, make sure you take away her poop, because the queen's job again is to lay as many eggs as possible. In fact, I'll put a question out there. How many eggs a day do you think a good queen lays? You're right, it's 2,000. So any of you with 6 kids, interesting. Yeah, you want a queen that can lay those kind of eggs, because in the summertime, at the height of the nectar flow, the hive needs over 50,000 bees before they start making people honey. So if you've got a hive that's really hopping, you want 100,000 bees in that. So that is really pulling in a lot of nectar so that you can get a lot of people honey. So the nurse bees, what they do is they also feed the larva. So a bee will be an egg for about 3 days, larva for 6, and then if it's going to be a drone, it's a little bit longer. It'll be capped over, and then it will develop completely for, I believe it's another 18 days, and then it's hatches. Okay, so the nurse bees will be feeding those larvae and egg about, I believe the number is about 1,300 times a day, as they give it a little bit of bee bread and a little bit of honey, or and 13 times a day. So that's a lot. So that requires a lot of bees to do that. There's also, you can see that the bees also will do some things called fanning. Okay. And fanning is for a lot of reasons. Here in Chicagoland, the weather has been substantially hot here. So the bees will do what's known as beard on the outside of the hive, because if there's a lot of bees inside, it's hot. So the bees go on the outside. The ones that are on the landing board will just basically, they sit there and fan, and they try to create what's called a swamp cooler through the hive to draw in the coolest air they can up through the hive and then out the top. So some bees will have brought water into the hive, and they're trying to draw that air across that water to cool it down. Fanning is also real important when they're trying to draw the moisture out of nectar. So when they're trying to draw it out of nectar, what happens is they need to get that nectar down below 17.5% moisture before the bees officially say it's honey. So they do a lot of fanning for that also. Some other bees, and then as time goes on, the bees will take on, again, a different role. So it's nectar transfer. So when honeybees bring in nectar, they land on their landing board, they work their way up into the hive to try to deposit that nectar. They carry it in a part of their body called a crop. So it doesn't go into their stomach. Hang on a second, we got a train. So the bees carry it in the crop. So they do not ingest nectar. They carry nectar. What they do is they put some enzymes from their body into the nectar, and then they bring it into the hive. At that point, they decide whether or not it's got enough enzymes to be deposited in one of the cells. If the bee says to themselves, not enough enzymes, they transfer it to another bee who holds it in their crop, and then they add some enzymes to it also. So eventually it'll have enough enzymes that they can put it, and they can officially, they call it nectar. So that's where nectar transfers. It will transfer to 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 different bees before they deposit it into one of those cells as nectar. So then there's another thing too, is wax production. Bees make wax on their bodies. It's similar in composition to our nails, not quite as hard though. So at a certain age, as you can see on the very top, at a certain age, those bees can make wax. So that frame that I showed you that already had wax on it, generally we try and keep a frame in the hive that has no wax on it. So the bees that are that old, they have something to do with that wax. So they deposit it on, another bee takes it, chews it, and then deposits it on that frame, so that they kind of constantly are adding new wax to the hives. And it comes off, like I said, in plates on their body, and it gets manipulated by other bees. Guarding is also very important. Certain times of the year, other bees, especially in fall, yellow jackets know that there's stores of honey in there, and they want to get that. So they'll have guard bees at the very front of the hive to make sure that any bug that's not the right bug is hopefully repelled. There's a handful of guard bees. But generally what they do most of their lives is forage. That's generally what they do. At that age, and I can't make out the date on it, looks like what, 20 some odd days, they become foragers. So when you talk about having flowers in your yard and you have your beehive, that's a nice combination, because the bees that are first coming out of the hive, the very first time, will forage very close to the hive. The first thing they do when they're foragers is they come out. Now they have been in pitch black for the earlier chunk of their life. Now they're foragers, so now they go outside, and a bee has 5 eyes. They have the 2 big ones that you see on either side of their head. And if you look closely at the center of their head, they have 3 dots. I believe they're called oculus. They're a different kind of eye. They're used to orient to the sun. So the bees, when they first come out of the hive, they will fly in these kind of erratic pattern right around the hive to, number one, recognize where they're at, so that they can kind of come back to the same coordinates. Then they will forage on all your beautiful plants and trees right in your yard because they're close by. In my yard, I have wild strawberries that I never knew I had before until I had honeybees. Massive amounts of wild strawberries, and it's because that's where the bees are foraging on those little tiny blue flowers. So it's always good to have flowers nearby for those newbies that are learning where their house is, and they're bringing in their contributing. After that, they become a real forager, where there will be some scout bees that have gone out every morning, and they will go and find the best sources of nectar. They will go in many different directions, and each one will come back and say, well, I found sunflowers over here, and the other one might say, oh, I've got another field that's better over here in this direction. And they come into the hive and they take those directions and they translate them from horizontal and distance directions to a vertical. And they will do the thing called a bee dance, where they will try to convince the other foragers that their location of nectar is the best one. So you basically have a handful of competing bees wiggling, and it's called the waggle dance. And that has been, they found that certain motions tell the other bees distance, and other ones tell them relationship to the sun, and east, west, north, south, and how far. So they found that the motions really translate to where they are. So the bee that does the best job will then take his pile of foragers, and they will go out to that field. And that's why I said before, is they work the best choice hard. They will work it until there's not another drop of nectar in that space, and then they're done with it. And then the next morning, the scouts will get up, they'll say, oh, now it's a sunflower field in the other direction is the best place to go. And then they'll try and convince them the next day where the best place to go. So they keep working spaces until they're finished. It's just kind of a fascinating relationship on how they figure out where they're supposed to go. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So the other thing the bees bring in from those flowers is pollen. And pollen is used for making a bee bread, which is used to feed all the babies. The bees collect it, generally they collect it on their body, and then they kind of scoop it into little pockets that are on their legs. And then they bring it into the hive, and that they position within the hive, kind of in certain areas. I'll show you in just a second, so that they have easy access to it for all of the baby bees. So let's go to the next slide. So you can see, so this is a frame of brood. And you can see the white stuff around the outside, that is all honey. So that is below 17.5% moisture honey. The bees are clustered right over the pollen. So my guess is this is probably midday, and they are making bee bread where they've gotten some honey, and they're mixing it with pollen in themselves to feed the babies. The center, which is yellow, those are capped over brood. So those are in the process of developing into a full-blown bee. It'd be hard to see, but if you could, at the edges on the bottom right, you would see a larva, and it would look like it would look like worms, little white worms, maybe yellow white worms. In varying days, so little white worms. A little further to the right would be eggs. All right, so the queen laid in the center first, kind of looks like she kind of went clockwise, and then the most recent ones would be the furthest out from the right. So the center bees that are capped are probably the oldest ones. So the far right ones would be eggs. So like I mentioned, they're eggs for 3 days, they become larvae. So the eggs are fed. When they fall over to the side, that's when you can see them kind of, you know, in that little C-shaped worm. That's what it looks like. And then they become larvae. And that's when they really start their growth pattern. Okay, let's go to the next one. This one shows you a nice collection of pollen. As you can see, that's all the yellow stuff, but it's different colors of yellow in this particular picture. In some other ones, you'd see that the pollen is colors of green. I've seen purple pollen. And so it just really depends on the flower that they get the pollen from. So they, again, you know, that's when having that mixture of flowers in your yard is really great, because then the bees have this mix of pollen and they know what it is they need. If you look on the far right there, all the white ones, so those are the larvae that have fallen over. Now they're developing. That's the color they would look like. And in this case, see the brown ones on the bottom right? Those are capped over honeybees. They're going to be born in time. Okay, let's go to the next one. I always like this picture. It's really a great picture of a honeybee flying away from me, but it's just a nice picture. You get to see their wings. At one point in time, the scientists were pretty sure that it was physically impossible for a honeybee to fly based on its weight to a wing ratio. And they found that they did some smoke tunnel testing with the bees, and they found out that the back wings do this kind of scoop motion, which allows it to kind of force air underneath the body and lets it fly, but it kind of shouldn't, but it does anyways. Let's go to the next slide. So this is what the components of a hive. We've talked about a handful of it, but I'll kind of work from the bottom up. So you just have a base. The next thing up is the landing board or bottom board. That's where the bees typically come in. That next box, which is a brood box. So here in the Midwest, you would need 2 of those for honeybees before you would get people honey. A separator you typically have is a queen excluder, because you kind of want to keep the queen out of your people honey, because occasionally they'll lay up there if they get kind of squeezed in the bottom 2 boxes. And then the honey supers, depending on the strategy of that beekeeper, they may keep piling more and more supers on top for the bees to kind of come in and bring honey in. For backyarders, we kind of keep an eye on it. We may actually extract when one of those boxes is pretty full. So it just depends. And then on top of it, you'll have an inner cover, and then you'll have an external cover for just to keep the elements out of the beehive. On the right, to me, it looks like a dangerously handsome beekeeper. Over there, I'm trying kind of a new method. I'm doing a dual hive type of things to see if 2 queens would drive more pollen, more honey production. So interesting experiment. Let's go to the next one. So I wanted to point out on this is not all stripy things are honeybees. You know, I've got the one in the upper corner there. I believe it's a bald-faced hornet. Those are the ones that make the football-shaped structures. They're generally in a tree somewhere. Those guys are nasty. They're just nasty. Really be careful around those. If you have a structure like that, what's good about it is they won't have any competition from another bald-faced hornet. You can actually buy a fake hive online. If you put a fake hive for the bald-faced hornets in your yard, none of the bald-faced hornets will come over because, quote, according to them, that territory has been taken. Okay, we've got some sand dabbers and things like that. A lot of the things that you've seen probably look like little upside down umbrellas, oftentimes, you know, between your doors in your house and the external door. Those are paper wasps. Those guys also like to just kind of fall on your neck and sting you as you walk by. So those are definitely things to be worried about and remove. They're just not polite. So let's go to the next slide. I want to show you what a frame of honey looks like. So this is a beautiful frame of honey. It's all capped in very, very light white wax. That's the lightest, nicest wax to have, is that wax that covers this honey. So basically the bees have filled this with nectar. The fanning bees have fanned enough to draw the moisture out of this. The bees have said it's below 17.5% moisture. Then they put that white capping on. What we do with this, so if this is in the people honey section, we will take this and we will take those white cappings off with a number of different ways you can do it. Sometimes with a hot knife, sometimes with a pick. It just depends on your strategy. You'll take the cappings off of both sides, and then you'll set those into an extractor. You'll fill the extractor with a certain amount, however many that extractor can hold, of these frames of uncapped honey. And then the extractor spins and will spin out the honey. So I'll show you that in the next picture. Go ahead to the next one. So that's a little extractor on the left side. And we have below the spigot, we have just, it's like a sieve, and it collects just kind of, there's always pieces of wood or maybe pieces of metal, occasional bee leg. We collect those all in that sieve before they go into the bucket of which is now honey. And so as you can see in the center one, we've placed all those frames in there. We'll fill this particular one. It looks like this one will hold 3. We'll fill it with 3, and then you either hand crank it or an electric crank and spin it a couple hundred times. And basically what it does is it throws the honey to the outside of the stainless steel container there. And then it kind of drips down the sides. And then eventually, as you can see in the right picture, it comes out. It's pretty thick because it does have things like clunks of wax and all kinds of other stuff from the hive. None of it bad, but just that's why we use that sieve to remove those kind of odd stuff that people don't want to see in their honey. Here in the mid-central US, actually in all of the United States, we like what we call runny honey. So it's relatively clear of things. It still has a lot of pollen in it, but it doesn't have any bee legs flying in it. Okay, next picture. This is a wonderful picture of different kinds of honey. So based on when you extract, you can get honey from completely clear, it's called water white honey, and then there's 7 different layers to almost the color of coal honey. And most people are accustomed to what we call amber honey, which is kind of more to the colors on the far right. But you can see the colors underneath there. Those are all honey colors. And so it's got everything to do with the flowers that time of year. So dandelions only bloom very early, and then they're gone, and then flowers bloom over time. And as you get more towards the end of the year, the honey picks up a darker color. So the reason we have amber honey is because a lot of the larger beekeepers, the more production ones, they will just simply bring in everything at one time, and then they extract at one time. And so that's kind of a blended color, but all still delicious. Lake County honey itself is the most awarded honey in the nation because of quality and color. And we have every single color of honey that's available in the world here in Lake County. So it's quite a place to live here, Lake County, Illinois. So let's go to the next one. For those of you who are interested in beekeeping, One of the clubs I'm involved is Lake County Beekeepers. There's also another one out here in McHenry, which is called Northern Illinois Beekeepers. But for those of you in the rest of the United States, what I'll recommend is just go to Google and dial up local bee club near me and join. What it gets for you is the ability to meet other beekeepers that are near you. So beekeeping in Tennessee is different than beekeeping in Illinois. And the same with, you know, beekeeping in California or the Rockies. They are different in terms of what you need to help the bees survive over the winter time, and how many boxes of bees do you need before you get people honey. Okay, so every area is slightly different. They have different times of when the honey's, the nectar's running. So you definitely want to get with a local bee club. Also, some of the things you'll learn from a local bee club is you'll watch a guy like me or some of our other mentor beekeepers, and you'll see them do things such as, you saw my bee suit. Well, my bee suit it's my third one that I bought. The bee suit I first bought, I now use for people to visit because it's so hot. I went to a slightly lighter bee one, but I'm much more comfortable with it. You'll see these beekeepers moving very slowly. Well, they're moving with purpose. New beekeepers always move fast, and that's kind of when you get stung, because you're scaring the bees. They don't know what's going on. If you're moving nice and slow, the bees respect that and they don't bother you as much. So there's lots of things. So that's why I would absolutely recommend join a bee club. Another thing I would recommend is a gentleman called Keith Delaplane, Plane. Just dial up Keith Delaplane Honeybees on YouTube. He has a wonderful series of steps that happen yearly with a bee. Here's the things that go on throughout the year, and he takes you out to the hive and works them. So if you're interested at all in honeybees, absolutely dial that one up. It's excellent. He's an excellent beekeeper. There's a lot of interesting stuff out on the internet, but Keith Delaplane does a great job of kind of getting through the real stuff around beekeeping. So I'll just suggest to you, beekeeping is a really interesting hobby. Once you get involved, you really tend to like it. There's lots of interesting things to do. My wife and I, we actually make what's known as gourmet honeys. We do creamed honeys, which are another way to use honeys. It's a slightly different product, but it's still honey. You know, we're even doing a honey barbecue sauce and honey mustards and hot honeys and things like that. So as much as honey is wonderful and great for you, there's all kinds of other things you can do with it. So I'm Frank Moriarty, and now I think we're going to just take some other questions.
Okay, yes, we are. And if you want, I'll do a stop share so we can see you. And
Yeah,
I know,
great.
okay, I see a question here. It says there's disagreement on the use of queen excluders. I understand why one would use it. How do some beekeepers not like them, or think they're not necessary?
So, so there are many ways to manage your bees. All right. So we talked about the honeybee deeps, and I started out with deep frames. I'm sorry, deep boxes. They're the 12-inch deep ones. I now have moved to only mediums. All right. So with deeps, you don't want the queen to go up into the medium frames, because if she lays up there, you'll have a frame that's obviously been brood. Brood frames are darker, so you don't really want to use those for honey in time. So if the queen goes up into where your honey is, you're sort of stuck now with this frame that you really can't use because you use deeps for brood, right? So that's when it makes sense for a queen excluder. Is the odds of the queen going up now are really low, because the queen is kind of too fat generally to get up through that. I don't use those anymore because I have mediums. So in my case, if the queen goes up, quote, higher than I would like, It doesn't matter because I can just utilize that frame, which is now brood frame. I can utilize that as brood the next year. It doesn't impact what I do because I use mediums. So if you do use mediums, you use 3 mediums instead of 2 deeps. Okay, it's just a slightly different approach to managing your hives. But some reasons why I shifted to mediums is because deeps are very heavy. They're very heavy. And a lot of beekeepers are not 18 and 19 years old. So the second I realized, and I had some conversation with some other beekeepers that had done that same thing, the second I realized that, I shifted to mediums. It's just kind of a personal choice. Neither one's better. But now that I have mediums, I don't need queen excluders, because sometimes people believe that queen excluders also slow down nectar and then honey production, because sometimes the bees don't like going through the excluder. It is smaller, it's narrow. It can like hurt the bees a little. You know, it's like going through a doorway in your house. If it's really small, you might scrape your shoulders on it. It's similar to that. So again, it's just kind of, how do you want to manage your bees and what do you think is the best approach? So neither one is better. It's just, that's why I'd suggest talk to other beekeepers and see what they do and see how they work, and then go. And you can always change. So that's the nice thing about beekeeping. But that's why I don't use excluders anymore, because I don't use deeps.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's a great answer. I have a question is, how much, if a person is getting started in beekeeping, how much does it cost to start your own apiaries and get going?
All right, so here's a huge recommendation for all of you. You don't start with 1 hive, you start with 2 hives. Now, I didn't want to do that when I first started. I got talked into it and I'm glad I did. And here's why. So I don't care whether you're deeps or mediums, doesn't matter. 2 hives, you're going to have 2 sets of bees. The thing is when you have 1 set of bees, you don't really know anything. You have a bunch of bees moving around and you got activity, but you don't know whether they're doing good or bad or sideways, because you have nothing to compare it to right here. I got nothing to compare it to. When you have 2, one of them is obviously better. No question about it. You can see it. The other part is with 2 hives, sometimes one of your hives is in trouble. It's struggling. It is just not coming together. And it could be the queen's not very good. She might not be well mated. She might have gotten hurt. So there's a number of things that could have happened to the queen, and she's just not doing it. Or she dies. And if she dies, you can order a queen. That's one way to do it, but you might not have enough bees to be able to even help. When you have a second set of hives, there are strategies where you can do some things of taking a set of frame of capped brood and doing a couple of things, making sure the queen's not on there, all the rest of that, shaking it off, and take that capped brood and stick it into the hive that's having trouble. So you're going to give her, the second hive, an instant punch of help, which if you only have 1 hive and that queen hurts herself and you don't have enough bees and all the rest of that, you may be to the point where you just can't do enough to help that hive, and it's going to die. And that's sad. And there's nothing you can do about it. You just, because you don't have that second resource. 2 hives, absolutely got to go that direction. That you need to do. Okay. The cost. So the cost of hives, about $400 for 1 hive. Cost of bees, about somewhere between $100 and $130 for a box of bees. If you're a brand new beekeeper, some things you can do is you can get what's called a nuke, which is oftentimes a box of that is already drawn out. It's got a working queen. A bunch of things are going on in that, and you buy this nuke, and you move it into a hive, one frame at a time, and it's already going. Those start a little later. If you're brand new, that's probably a good way to go. The first year is to get nukes because you get them a little later. Weather hopefully is working better for you. There's a handful of things that are happening as you get a nuke. It's like 2 or 3 weeks after you would get a box of bees. So your odds are better that the first year they're going to take off. They'll be okay. Sometimes getting a brand new box of bees and you're really new at it, there's some things you might not be doing all that great, and you get the bees early and you get a terrible cold weather in, and now the bees are going to struggle. So sometimes it's better to go with a nuke. Again, where you're at, join that club, get some advice locally about a good direction to go on that.
That's a great idea. There's another question. Do beekeepers look for spots to keep their hives? The person says, I have a ½ acre wide open with a few maples and a few small conifers. I'd like to see some hives over there.
So yes and no. Backyarders, which is personally is the majority of beekeepers, are backyarders. They're 90% of our club is backyarders. Then we've got 4 or 5 of them that have anywhere between 100 and 500 beehives. So backyarders typically have their 2, 3, 4 bees, 4 hives in their yard, and that's the ones they want to work. More commercial guys, if they can put 20 hives out there and there's a lot of food for the bees to go to, they might be interested. But they need a lot because it's work. If you only have 2 hives here and 2 hives over there and 2 hives over there, those commercial guys are not interested. It's too hard to manage 2 hives at a time. 20 hives at a time, they might be interested. So if you're looking for some at a local place, just get onto their Facebook, say, hey, I've got some property, and you might have somebody that's interested. Again, every part of the country is going to be a little different. So that you may have someone say, hey, I can't do it in my yard. I'll be glad to do it in your yard.
Great. Yeah, at the Conservation Foundation, where our office is, it's an organic farm, and we have several hives, and we have a beekeeper that comes in and takes care of them, and they pollinate all of our plants on our garden. So it's great. So I'm not seeing any more questions, and I see we are out of time. We've gone a little over, but I appreciate all the information. This is great. I have a friend who's starting, or I understand they just started some hives this year. So I passed on your stuff, so hopefully they joined us, and I know some people will join later. So I want to thank you, Frank, for all your time today and all the information. And if you want to visit their website, it's honeywithstyle.com, correct?
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And I might be purchasing some of that honey cream. So with that, I'm going to, hey, quick question then. Is there a particular honey that you recommend that you have?
So our regular honey's wildflower, and I just love wildflower. It's a nice, sweet enough. It's thick, and it's just a wonderful honey. The ones that we sell the most of is my cinnamon honey spread, my cinnamon creamed honey, because it's the consistency of frosting. So people will put it on, they'll put it in their oatmeal, but they definitely put it on their toast and bagels and English muffins. That's wonderful. It's just a wonderful, different way of eating honey.
Oh, that sounds great, because I love honey toast, cinnamon sugar toast. So that would be great.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, well, thank you, Frank, very much. And this, as I said, this will be on our YouTube channel, and we will send it to everyone that registered for the webinar. I'm Jan Ware with the Conservation Foundation. Thank you, Frank, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.